Well, hello, everybody. This is Danny. I'm the lead pastor at Cambridge City Christian Church. I want to welcome you to our latest edition of Life Group Live.
I have no words for how you said that. That's just absolutely, my mind has been numbed.
Okay, so did I just ruin this whole episode by?
No, I think we can recover.
Okay,
I think
all
we
right.
can recover.
Okay,
There was some passion there.
all right. Maybe like when I retire one day, I could do like sports, like the guy that talks on the. You think that would work? Like at basketball games and stuff?
That
Or do I need to
you
just?
might want to keep some other options open too. Walmart,
All right.
you could be a greeter.
A greeter, but I don't know. But people would probably look at me if I'm like, "Hey, how are you?" They'd probably think I'm a little weird. I don't know if that would work there.
I've had a lot of practice with people thinking I'm weird. And trust me, it's not that big of a deal.
Well, with that, anyways, we're glad that you're joining us for this episode. I've really enjoyed us. Our series is called "What Do You Believe?" And today, in this episode, we're talking about or asking the question: Is Christ God? The first week we talked about does Christianity make sense? Last week we talked about does God exist? And so we're getting a little bit more specific, and we'll continue to do that over these 8 weeks.
I've got it covered here. Is Christ God? Yes. Thanks for joining us.
Well,
Or do you want to go into?
I think we need to. Yeah, I don't know that for some watching that's enough.
Okay, well then let's get started.
All right. Well, there you go. Let's get started. All right. So we'll jump into this first question here, and we'll bring it up here on the screen. Have you ever had anyone question you whether Jesus was really God's son, and if so, what did they say? So have you ever had anybody ever question you about the divinity, I guess you could say, of Christ?
Right. And yes, I have. Usually what I'll hear is something along the lines of, well, isn't it possible he was just a really good man and was a good teacher but I mean, to be God's son.
Yeah.
That doesn't seem very very plausible, or they just don't believe in the concept of God to begin with.
Well, I think when we're talking about the divinity of Christ, I mean the concept makes it stand out amongst any other religion in the world. I mean,
Right.
no other religion in the world claims anything remotely what Jesus claimed for himself. So I think we got to be honest and upfront about that yeah, this is a pretty big concept, and it's not just big in the sense that Jesus was saying something that was somewhat different than everyone else, but the ramifications of it are big, because if he truly is God's son, that tells us something about God himself, but it also tells us something about the way he feels about us. So this is a big question. So I understand why some people maybe question that, because it does, if it, and we're going to get into some of the evidence, but it does almost sound too good to be true, or unlikely, or whatever.
You mentioned the word ramifications, and that word is key to even looking back to the seriousness of his claim, because that could get him killed. If he was just a man claiming to be God's son, that wasn't taken lightly.
No.
Today, it's, people go, okay, God's son, we got you. But back then, to make that claim was easily a death penalty.
Yeah, and that's a really good point, because I mean, for us, it's a strange claim, or to some, it's a strange claim today. Back then, it was a dangerous claim to some, and yeah. Okay.
When you look at him in Scripture, a lot of times he doesn't necessarily specifically make the claim. He'll ask people, "Who do you say I am?"
Yeah.
And then if they say you're the Son of God, you're the Messiah, he doesn't correct them.
Yeah, he's like, you got it. Yeah, yeah. Well, when you think of Jesus as God's son, what are some things that you have at times or currently are questioning about who he says he was and is? Um, I think for me, one of the hardest things for me to understand, it's kind of tied into that perennial question of why does bad things happen to good people? It's okay, if Jesus is God's son, why didn't he come down like the Jews thought the Messiah would, and just come down and wipe out all the evil and just leave good behind. So I think that is one area that and in the past I've struggled with. I understand now, and because I've listened more to what he said, that he didn't come to establish a physical kingdom. He came here to take care of our souls, our eternities, and that makes a whole big difference. But that for me for a while was probably something that made it a little hard for me to accept Christ's divinity because of the way he went about things.
One of the things, probably the biggest thing that I would question about him back, especially in my early days as a believer, was just why would he do what he did?
Mm-hmm.
Why would he come? I mean, he's the Son of God. He's at the right hand of the Father.
Yeah.
And he's going to come down here.
That's like saying, "Hey, you get to be at Disney all day, but you're going to leave Disney and we're going to go ride the horse down at Meyer." Right? I mean,
which if you got to ride the horse at Meyer without going to Disney first, it might be okay.
Yeah, right. But you were already at Disney, and you're like, "No, we're not. We're leaving. We're going to Meyer."
Disney, you were also the honored guest at the Main Street Parade, and Mickey invited you to lunch.
Yeah. I want to, before we move on, I want to apologize to Meyer, and I don't mean to demean your horse. I apologize for that.
Do they still have the horse?
Maybe they don't with COVID or whatever.
I don't know.
Yeah, he's been put out in the stable. All right. So let's talk a little bit about the implications of Christ as God. So one thing that we have to remember, one, we cannot deny that Jesus has changed the world forever. History has been changed because Jesus claimed what he said he is. He claimed that he's God's son. It's changed everything. I mean, another note here that I have here is that our calendar is based off of his life.
BC and AD.
Yeah. Before Christ, the Anno Domini, year of our Lord. So yeah, our calendar is based off of him. And then also the very institutions, it's interesting, the very institutions that deny who Jesus was use things that were changed because of Jesus. I don't want to get too deep into all this, but historically, we look at universities. They were established by the church. I mean, a lot of people forget like Harvard and Princeton and Yale. Those were all institutions. Oxford they were created by the church.
How could you forget that they were created by the church?
Well, yeah. But again, it was because of Jesus and his church. Right. And that's just a few things. Jesus has influenced a lot of things. So can you think of some specific ways outside of religion that Jesus has influenced the world? I've already shared a couple. What are some other ways he's influenced the world?
Well, you took the first one that I had thought of was the calendar.
Well, here's one that I'll throw out at you. So it's hard for us to understand this because we live in the 21st century that's been shaped by the church for the last 20 centuries plus. If you go back into Jesus' time, some of the concepts that we hold today as just being obviously the best and right thing to do weren't there. Like, for instance, charity. Something that people, it's interesting to me, you'll see very even secular institutions that want nothing to do with Jesus that talk about doing good and helping others. That was a foreign concept back in Jesus' day. That's not something you normally did. Now it's like something we should do. That's because of Jesus.
We look around, you can see grace, you can see forgiveness that are seen as positive attributes even in our culture today.
Yeah.
But you'll see a lot of things that maybe the people like to use part of what Jesus taught, but maybe not the whole divine side of it.
Yeah.
Bring it in that we need to be forgiving. Which we should be forgiving as Christians. Absolutely, we should be forgiving far more so than we probably are. Truth be told.
Yeah.
But we also need to be loving. But we need to love in the way that Christ loved, which sometimes loving means that if somebody's doing something that's against God's word, we can lovingly rebuke that. And that's not just lip service there. If I see you doing wrong and I love you, I should want you to be doing right. But that's the side of that aspect that Jesus brought. with him that a lot of people don't want to hear.
Yeah. So there's no doubt he's influenced the world. There's no doubt about it. So let's dig a little bit more into this. So what about the claims that Jesus made himself? Jesus made many startling statements that, if made today, some would really wonder what's wrong with him. We talked about that. Some of the religious leaders wanted to kill him because of the claims he made. I mean, one of the claims that he made was that he was the Son of God. So this concept of the Son of God is an interesting one, because today we would think of that as like his offspring. Like, if I were to go up to somebody and say, if you could tell me what is a son of God, that would be, well, that's the child of God. But that's not really what it meant back in Jesus' day. When people heard this concept of the Son of God, they knew what he was claiming for himself. He was claiming that he is God. So this was a crazy, pretty crazy, challenging claim that, like you talked about, could be a dangerous one, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And not just dangerous for him, but dangerous for his followers too.
And it was, especially in the earliest days with the Jewish authorities when the church started in the Middle East, there in Jerusalem, Judea, Samaria. That was a dangerous claim to say that Jesus was God's son.
The Jewish teachers of the law and the leaders didn't just say, "Oh, you're the Son of God? Great.
Yeah.
Thanks. It's great to meet you."
Yeah. And there's a lot of reasons for that. We won't get into that. But so Jesus often asked people who they thought he was. You already mentioned that. In Matthew 16, it says this, "But what about you?" he asked. "Who do you say that I am?" And then verse 16, Simon Peter answered, "You are the Messiah, the Son of the living God." So again, Jesus was really good at asking questions. He didn't always just say, "Here I am, everybody." People could deduce from who he was that he was God's son. Yeah. All right. Well, so do you think it was easy? So from that verse, do you think it was easy for Peter to claim that Jesus was the Son of God? Why or why not?
Was it easy for him to confidently say that to Jesus? I think that probably was.
Mm-hmm.
For him to say that out loud, to take the risk of being heard saying that, was not easy. It couldn't have been easy.
And especially
kind of bringing on a death sentence potentially.
Yeah, and especially in his later years, and he would eventually die for his faith. But this claim was a very dangerous, very dangerous one. And but something, and we'll get into this a little bit more, so I don't want to say too much, but this is one of the reasons why I believe that Jesus' claim was true, because Peter was around Jesus every day. If he saw somebody who was not perfect, if he saw someone who was, he wouldn't have said a statement like that.
Right.
So. All right, well, is it any different for us today? Does following Jesus the right way still require boldness and courage? I think this is an easy question.
Yeah, I think with each and every passing day, it's going to require a little more boldness, a little more courage.
Yeah.
As we go along, right now we're at a point where culture I've been serving in ministry now for nearly 20 years, for 17 years now, and culture has shifted already in that small amount of time to where we've gone from people would just kind of maybe quietly roll their eyes, or if they thought that you were wanting to follow Jesus, to now you'll have people that will just out and out dismiss you. They will say bad things, and eventually it's going to start coming to physical threats, financial threats, whether churches will be allowed to stay open, whether all these different things that we're headed toward.
Yeah, it's definitely, if we're going to follow Jesus and believe in him the way that the Word teaches us to, it's going to require us to be bold.
And I think that's a good thing.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
I don't get excited about the thought of having to face persecution, but it's going to force us to come down off the fence on one side or the other.
Yeah.
We can't just keep walking on it, trying to keep everybody happy and honor Jesus. And I think a lot of Western Christians do that. And we're going to have to decide which side we're going to follow.
Yeah. Yep. Well, like we said, Jesus made a lot of claims for himself, and here are three of the biggest ones. One, the first biggest one is that he claimed to be the Son of God. In John 5:18, it says, I think we have that scripture. For this reason, they tried all the more to kill him. Not only was he breaking the Sabbath, but he was even calling God his own Father, making himself equal with God. So it was a dangerous claim. Another claim that he made was this one. The second one, he claimed that he and the Father are one. In John 10:30, it says, I and the Father are one. Again, his Jewish opponents picked up stones to stone him. But Jesus said to them, I have shown you many good works from the Father. For which of these do you stone me? I've done all this good stuff and shown you these miracles and shown you that I'm no ordinary person, and yet you're still going to stone me. That's what he's saying. We're not stoning you for any good work, they replied, but for blasphemy, because you, a mere man, claim to be God. We don't care that you did a lot of good stuff. It was something you said we don't like, so we're going to take you out and kill you.
I stop and think about that, and okay, yeah, he's saying this, but there's also evidence. If you weren't there when he fed the 5,000, if you weren't there when he brought Lazarus back to life, if you weren't there, insert miracle here, at least you've heard of it. I've got to believe that.
Yeah.
That they had heard of these things from people that were reputable eyewitness sources.
Well, but so when you were a kid, like, here we go, right?
That's
like,
a long time ago.
Yeah, that was a few years ago. There was always this little saying you would say to somebody that was being mean to you, right? Sticks and stones may break my bones, but words will never hurt me, right? I mean, we would hear that. The Pharisees would have never said that because the words did hurt them, obviously. And what's really sad is that he was doing all this great stuff, but they just totally dismissed it because there was some words that they didn't like that he said. But it was his actions that backed up his words. That was his whole point.
They couldn't refute the words that they disliked. I mean, they could say, well, this shouldn't be the case. But he had the evidence to back it up.
Yeah, and a couple of times in Jesus' ministry, Jesus said he didn't go out to do miracles just for miracles' sake. He did it to show that he had authority to say what he was saying.
Right.
The miracles were a byproduct of the message, not vice versa. Like the message was what was paramount, but the miracles were done to prove that the message was valid. But yeah, this claim that he was God's son is a big one because it's claiming divinity.
Right.
And
then to claim that he is God, he and God are one and the same.
Yeah. It's a big claim.
Taking it a step further.
Yeah, and I think that's where a lot of people have trouble even today. That God would be in a form of a person. I mean, it just doesn't seem to mesh. There's something about it that's different.
I'm kind of glad that it doesn't seem to mesh because I like my God to be just a little beyond my understanding.
Absolutely. Yeah. Well, another claim that he made was this one, that he claimed to know what people thought. So in Mark chapter 2, it says, immediately Jesus knew in his spirit that this is what they were thinking in their hearts. And he said to them, why are you thinking these things? Which is easier, to say to this paralyzed man, your sins are forgiven, or to say, get up, take your mat, and walk? Kind of gets back to what we were just talking about. But I mean, go back to verse 8 for me, please. Because he was able to read into their hearts. That's something only God can do. And so by him saying that, again, it's another claim to his divinity that he was able to do that. So these are some pretty big claims. All right, so why are these claims big claims? Let's look at that for a second. When we hear these kinds of claims, there are four possibilities that we can take from what Jesus has claimed. This was something that came out, I don't know, it was probably 30 or 40 years ago. I believe it was McDowell, maybe Francis Schaeffer, that came up with these four conclusions that we can take. So Jesus has made all of these claims about himself. And again, there's other claims. We're not going to cover those today. But with all these claims, there are really only four conclusions that we can take. We have to pick a camp. Okay? All right. So the first one is that Jesus was a liar, liar, pants on fire. All right? Okay.
A robe on fire.
Robe on fire. Liar, liar, yeah. Robe on fire. Okay. I never thought I would say those words. Okay, go ahead. I'm sorry.
That's the impact I have on you. No, if he's going to claim to be God, one of the outcomes of that would be you, and what the leaders were thinking was that he was lying. There's no way that you are God. There's no way that you are God's son. You're making this up. That's a bunch of garbage. Stop saying that. Where's my stone and shoes at?
Mm.
You know that's absolutely the first possibility.
Yeah, that Jesus was a liar. And there's some question. First, did Jesus lie by saying he was God when he knew he wasn't? That's really what it comes down to. Was he walking around trying to represent as someone that he wasn't? Now, many who would say this, that Jesus was a liar, would also agree that Jesus was a great moral teacher. So that doesn't quite make sense, right? Because on the one hand, you're saying he's a liar about his divinity, but all the other stuff, he's a great moral teacher. See, again, we're picking and choosing,
But
right?
Isn't that the way humanity is?
Yeah.
We like to pick and choose. People can say great things about Aaron Rodgers as a quarterback, but that doesn't negate the fact that he plays for the Green Bay Packers, and that negates all good that he's done in the world.
Wow, somebody's a little sore.
I'm a Bears fan. We've already been over this.
I know. Well, so yeah, I mean, that is I think that's a really important point, because if he was a liar, then honestly, you can't accept anything he has to say. I mean,
you can't trust anything.
No, you can't trust him.
I mean, would you want to spend time with a liar and put your life on the line, trusting somebody that you know lies about big things like that, let alone little tiny things?
Yeah. So again, I think that argument that he was a liar, I don't think there's much weight to that. All right, let's look at the next one. The next one would say that Jesus was a lunatic. So here's the question. It's saying here, if this is true, where is the evidence? There is no text, Bible or otherwise, that would point to Jesus as a messed up man. What really jumps out to me about this lunatic part is people, here we are 20 centuries later, trying to psychologically analyze someone that we weren't even around. But because of what he said, we just assume that he's messed up. I mean, that would be no different than me, looking at somebody walking down the street and saying something, and me just assuming that they're crazy without really talking to them and knowing them.
Well, and then by extension, you would have to believe that either his disciples were just as crazy, or they were stupid. And it might have been easy for some of the disciples to say, well, they're just simple fishermen, whatever. But not all of them were simple fishermen.
Yeah.
I think Luke...
And not all of them, and the chances of all of them being stupid, or, I mean, maybe 3 or 4 of them are like, wait a minute, this is dumb. Why am I following this lunatic?
Right.
But none of them did that. No, they all went to their grave,
Went to their grave defending him. They went to their grave because they defended him.
Yeah, and who is going to, if somebody's a lunatic, who's going to do that? I mean, come on.
If you spend time around them, you're generally going to have enough evidence there, even if you don't want to believe it, that you'll know if somebody is troubled and has significant mental health issues, which is what we're talking about here. I mean, it would be if he was, some sort of a paranoid schizophrenic or something, that he might create this illusion that he's God.
Yeah.
But there's no evidence to point that direction.
Yeah, and one other thing I would pull into this too, sometimes the actions of Jesus' enemies say a lot about Jesus himself.
Right.
Because if the Pharisees and the Sadducees, the teachers of the law back then, if they thought Jesus was some lunatic or crazy guy, they wouldn't have spent any time of day going to hear Jesus teach and preach and criticizing him and downing him. They wouldn't have gone and done those things if they thought he was just some crazy guy. So again, that one there to me is just absolutely makes no sense. All right, the next one, some people might say that Jesus was just a legend. He didn't really exist physically. It was just a story, kind of like John Bunyan or Paul Bunyan. I'm sorry, not John, Paul Bunyan. Some of these legends that have been created, some people say, well, Jesus is another one. And this idea is that the words and actions of Jesus recorded in the Bible were actually made up. And if the real Jesus saw them, he would be angry. So
Let me
something
ask
was
you
made of Jesus later.
then, and I start to blur these things together. I probably said this in Life Group Live in the last couple of weeks, or maybe it was during my other Life Group online. Um, so George Washington was a legend, right?
Mm.
Because I never saw him.
No, we never saw him. No.
Um, You know, so even towards that end, you know, you look back, the Pilgrims are just a legend. They, I mean, sailing across nearly 500 years ago, sailing across the ocean in a ship, that seems preposterous. There's no way that they did that. They're just a legend. You know, because if we're going to believe that Jesus is a legend, even though his life, particularly the last 3 years of ministry, are more well documented than any of these other historical figures, then we can't believe anything we haven't seen with our own eyes. And frankly, with the advent of deep fakes and other just really shockingly accurate looking video manipulations today, I don't know that I can trust everything I see with my eyes today. So everything's a legend.
Yeah.
I don't even know if you exist.
No, I do.
That's exactly what you would tell me if you didn't exist. No, all kidding aside, he is.
Yeah.
His life and his miracles are so well documented.
Yeah.
It would require such a conspiracy like the world has.
Oh yeah, this would be the greatest conspiracy of all time. If we can go back to that previous text, slide, it says at the bottom here, the four gospels were written at the same time as Jesus' contemporaries. So if Jesus was a legend, and we have these four gospels written, they weren't written 200 years after Jesus had died. They were written right after he had died, and when people who had seen him were still alive. If this was a legend, those people would have just rose up and say, that's a bunch of crud. I mean, what they just wrote, that's not true. None of that happened. But you don't see that evidence anywhere. Even in texts that were written by Jewish leaders and what, you don't see anybody coming right out and saying Jesus didn't exist and that these things that he didn't happen. Now they denied what they thought he was because they thought he wasn't really God's son for a variety of reasons. But they never denied that he didn't do the things. Yeah, and that he didn't do the things that he did. All right, so if we can go back a little bit, one more again for me, please. So see, again, it's inconceivable that a manufactured story would have gotten any traction when it was written at the same time when many thousands who saw it were still alive. So again, the idea of a legend, I think, really in some ways is probably inconceivable. All right, number 4. So the fourth option, so he's either a liar, he's either a lunatic, he's either a legend, or what?
He is Lord.
Or he is Lord. And so what are his credentials to say that he is Lord? Well, let's take a look at it. Let's look at his credentials. But actually, before we get into those credentials, I think it's important to ask this question. What are credentials, and why are they important, and how are they used today?
Well, credentials are evidence in a lot of ways. If I'm going to tell you that I would be the school or the church here wanted to start a competitive baseball team. I was going to tell you I should coach that team. You'd want to see some credentials. You'd want to see some proof, see my resume, see, okay, he coached the little league here, and then he coached at this high school. Then he went on to coach at AAA baseball. He probably knows what he's doing. It's a pattern of evidence.
You're really setting high standards for our baseball team. They have to be a AAA coach.
Well,
wow.
Yeah, we want to go big or we go home.
But credentials isn't just about the information itself. It's the person who gives the credentials, right? Kind of like what you were saying. And that's why they're important. So again, it's his credibility. And so when we look here, one of the credentials that we have is the first one is that Jesus was sinless. In John 8:46, it tells us that his life was so impeccable that even his enemies couldn't deny it. Like you don't see anywhere written outside or in the biblical text that question his sinlessness. His followers, Jewish men, taught about the impossibility of anyone being sinless, but then they said Jesus was just that. So you look at what they wrote in some of the letters later, Paul and others. You know, they they wrote all the time about how sinful we are.
Right.
So they would know what a sinful person looks like.
Well, and again,
But Jesus wasn't
his
that.
followers, his disciples, many of them went to death defending him, and if they lived with him while he was out doing ministry and followed him closely enough to get the dust from his shoes onto his feet, onto their feet, if he sinned, they would have seen it.
Yeah. Yeah.
And they wouldn't have followed him to their death. They would have been fools
Yeah.
to do that.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Well, and here's another one too. How about Judas? So Judas was one who betrayed Jesus. So when he betrayed Jesus for what, 30 pieces of silver, right? When he betrayed Jesus, he could have outed him right there. He could have said, Jesus, this is a joke. This whole thing's a joke. I just pulled one over on you. I got my silver and Jesus isn't who he is. But we know that after he turned on Jesus, what did he do? He said that I have sinned in betraying innocent blood, and he killed himself over it. Right. I don't think somebody that thought he was fake would have gone out and hung himself over it. So again, I think that's a really important clue as well that points to his sinless nature and that he was different than anyone else. Another credential for him here. Or actually, let's ask this. Why was his sinlessness so important? Why is that important? Why is it important that Jesus doesn't have any sin in his life?
Because that he could not be God if he had even a hint of sin. Mm-hmm. Just even a tiny little speck of sin.
Yeah, and then from our perspective, for him to take away our sin, it required a perfect sacrifice. And Jesus had to be that. So yeah, he couldn't be God and he couldn't be a perfect sacrifice if he had been sinful. Another thing that's really important is prophecy, another credential. Jesus fulfilled more than 200 prophecies predicted about him, some thousands of years before he was born, some of these prophecies. So somebody did this statistical analysis, okay? And they said, okay, what are the odds of somebody fulfilling just 8 of these prophecies? Not all 200, just 8 of them. And here's what he came up with. He said that the chances of that happening would be 1 in 10 and I couldn't figure out how to do it on the screen, but it's 1 in 10 to the 15th power. So that's 1 in 10 with 15 zeros.
That's a lot of zeros.
That's a lot of zeros. And we talked a couple of weeks ago that there are some things that are practically impossible. Like they are impossible. That would be one. That they would be fulfilled in someone else is impossible. It had to have been fulfilled in him. So that's a pretty big credential. Yeah.
For sure.
So again, why is this a powerful argument saying that Jesus is the Son of God? Can any other religious leaders and founders claim such a great claim as this? No. Muhammad, Buddha, any of these leaders of the other religions of the world, they can't do that. There wasn't prophecies written about them that they fulfilled. Yeah. It's yeah. So again, if we can move on through here to the next slide. Another one is miracles. So Jesus performed many miracles, from changing water into wine to calming a stormy sea. We know that he also healed sickness and disease. He rose the dead. Again, this is another credential. It's miracles. It's interesting that no one in the Bible or other writings of Jesus' time denies the miracles of Jesus.
Well, and even we talk about when he walked on the sea. Mm-hmm. Take that one into account. That would be one of the easier miracles to stage.
Yeah.
And even at that, I heard a teacher talking about David Copperfield, the great illusionist, said in order for him to do something of that magnitude, for David Copperfield to do this in the 21st century, he would have required, his estimates were at least 3 semi-trucks full of equipment and a crew of dozens. Mm-hmm. None of which really existed back then to begin with.
No.
And he did this without any of that, and with witnesses again.
Yeah. And that's a really interesting point, because something maybe we forget. I've heard people say, well, Jesus, if he did those miracles today, you could disprove them. But let's just say for a moment that he was trying to pull one over on them. They didn't have the know-how pull these things over. And you know, one of the lessons we've done, sermons I've done here in the last couple of weeks, is about people being healed there in Mark 1 and 2, and the man who's Matt, you know, he was lowered through the roof and he was healed. I mean, if he wasn't really healed that day, I'm sure the Pharisees would have had a field day with that, right? Like, look at him, he's still sitting over there on that mat, and Jesus said that he's healed, and you know,
all they wanted was one slip up.
yeah,
They wanted Jesus to fail one time, slip up one time. They could say beyond a shadow of a doubt, he is not the Son of God.
mm-hmm.
Execute him.
Yeah, yeah, and yeah, yeah. I mean, it's just to me, when you add all these things up, it points to the validity of Jesus' claim. You know, his credentials back it up, healing, and his ability to be able to see into other people's hearts, and I mean, just all these things added up really point to something, to someone. I think that's truly amazing. So, which miracle of Jesus stands out to you the most, and which miracle causes people to question if it really happened? I like the walk on water one. That's probably one of my favorites. How he was able to do that. Just I can't imagine the sight of that. And you know, the one that really struck that I think would be cool for me personally to experience, although I probably do the same thing as Peter, is to walk on water with Jesus. Um, you
Of
know,
course, you wouldn't lose faith at all.
oh no, never, never. No, I would walk and dance and everything on water, and I wouldn't have to worry about. No, I'd probably be worse than Peter, but
I think
yeah,
we'd all sink a little.
yeah. So that miracle to me is one that really stands out. So the another credential is his resurrection. Jesus claimed 5 times in his life that he would raise from the dead. There's many places he claims it. So Christ, again, he moved history as only God could do. And so these are some of his credentials. And we are going to get into the resurrection, I believe, here in the next week or two, as whether it really did happen. So I don't want to spend a lot of time here on this one. That's right. But again, there is a lot of proof out there in his resurrection too. So let's look here, move on ahead, and so what, as we close up here today, what stands out to you the most in what we've talked about? What stands out to you the most, Travis, that really maybe gets it across the goal line in terms of Jesus and his divinity?
It's the totality of what he had to say, and maybe the fact that he was so opposed and still is 2,000 years after his death and resurrection. If he was just a good teacher, why would people still oppose him with such vitriol today? The fact that everybody wanted to kill him back then, maybe not everybody, but
a lot of people.
A lot of people wanted to kill him back then. They were scared. They were intimidated. And we don't have to be scared or intimidated by him because we can see all of this evidence. We can see his credentials, and we can know that he is the Son of God. I have zero doubt. And there are not many things in this world that I can say I have zero doubt about. I have zero doubt that Jesus is the Son of God.
I think what you say there, for me, what you say is true for me too. I think it's the accumulation of all the evidence. It isn't like there's just one piece of evidence. There's so many different layers of it that just fit it all together. I mean, it's just the sheer amount of evidence that's out there that proves his existence. Yeah, in my mind, leaves no doubt. But again, we have to be open to that, and we have to be willing to to listen to that evidence. And I'm afraid that's where many people fall off, is they come preconceived. Now, you might argue and say, "Well, wait a minute, Danny, you're preconceived." I will tell you this: I've questioned a lot of things through the years. That's how I'm so certain of this, because I've questioned some of the claims that are out there, and I've read and I've kept my mind open, and God's brought me to the place I am now. And I would encourage anybody watching this to do the same thing.
Well, I was, before I got saved, nearly getting close to 25 years ago now. I definitely did not want to believe. I was looking for every reason to disprove him. I shouldn't. It wasn't like I had crews out there scouting archaeological digs. He said, "There's no evidence there. See, I told you he's not real." Yeah. But I can tell you that moment that I surrendered, that I was different. I had been changed. in that exact moment. For me, there's no greater evidence than that because I knew who I was. I know who I still am in a lot of ways, but I know who lives in me now that never did before.
Yeah. Yeah, and we talked about that I think last week. Just the evidence of lives that are changed, and we both are experiencing that.
Right.
Yeah. Well, we want to thank you again for joining us again for this edition of Life Group Live as we've walked through the question of whether Christ is God. I hope it's been helpful to you. And if you have any questions, maybe there's other things you would like to know or talk with us about, you can always email us here at the church. You can email me or Travis, our first initial last name. So for me, it'd be D Berry. For Travis, would be T Minor. And both of us are at 4C, the number 4C church. And we would love to be able to help you as you walk in your faith journey. Until our next episode, God bless you. And we'll learn more about why we have reasons to believe what we believe. Believe me, they're out there and they're ready for you. We just have to look. We'll see you next time.